What would you do if you saw the person who changed your life forever, standing in a crowd, aged and forgotten, unaware of the incredible impact they had on the world? Bob Marley faced exactly this moment in 1979, and his response would create one of the most emotionally powerful scenes ever witnessed at a concert, reminding 25,000 people of the debt we all owe to the teachers who believed in us when no one else did. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music history's most incredible moments, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell because we uncover the hidden gems that shape the legends we know today. July 15, 1979. National Stadium, Kingston, Jamaica. Bob Marley was performing one of his most triumphant homecoming concerts, the energy electric, as 25,000 of his countrymen celebrated their musical hero. The Survival Tour had been a massive success, and this Jamaica concert was the emotional peak of Bob's career, performing at home for his people in the country that had shaped his message and his music. Bob was midway through No Woman, No Cry when something in the crowd caught his eye. In section C, about 15 rows back, he saw a face that stopped his heart. An elderly black woman, probably in her 70s, wearing a simple floral dress and a sun hat, was swaying gently to the music. Her face was deeply lined with age, her hair silver white, her hands gnarled with arthritis. But her eyes were the same kind, intelligent eyes that had looked at a skinny 8-year-old boy in 1954 and seen potential where everyone else saw poverty. Bob's voice faltered slightly as the memory came flooding back. Miss Sarah Thompson, his first music teacher at Stepney Primary School in St. Anne Parish. The woman who had taught him his first chords on a battered old guitar, who had stayed after school to work with him when other teachers had written him off as a poor country boy with no future. Bob finished the verse of No Woman, No Cry, but his mind was racing. Could it really be her? After all these years? He hadn't seen Miss Sarah since he left Stepney Primary in 1955 to move to Trenchtown with his mother. That was 24 years ago. She would be, he calculated quickly, she would be 73 years old now. As the song continued, Bob kept stealing glances at the woman in section C. The more he looked, the more certain he became. It was definitely Miss Sarah Thompson, the teacher who had planted the first seeds of his musical journey. But something about her appearance troubled Bob deeply. Even from the stage, he could see that she looked frail, tired, and her clothes, while clean and pressed, were clearly old and worn. The woman who had given him the gift of music appeared to be struggling financially, sitting in one of the cheaper sections of the stadium while he, her former student, was earning millions from the talents she had helped nurture. Bob felt a wave of emotions wash over him: gratitude, love, guilt, and an overwhelming desire to honor the woman who had started it all. He made a decision that would create one of the most moving moments in concert history. As No Woman, No Cry ended, Bob didn't transition into the next planned song. Instead, he walked to the front of the stage and held up his hand for silence. The crowd, sensing something significant was about to happen, gradually quieted. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bob said, his voice carrying clearly through the stadium, "sometimes Jah brings people into our lives at exactly the moment we need them most. And sometimes, if we're very blessed, Jah brings them back to us years later so we can properly thank them." The crowd was completely attentive now, hanging on every word. Bob shaded his eyes against the stage lights and looked directly toward section C. "Miss Sarah Thompson," he said clearly, "if that's you in section C, row 15, wearing the beautiful floral dress, would you please stand up?" A murmur went through the crowd as 25,000 people turned to look in the direction Bob was indicating. Miss Sarah, shocked to hear her name called from the stage, slowly and shakily stood up, her arthritis making the movement difficult. "Miss Sarah," Bob said, his voice now thick with emotion, "you probably don't remember a skinny little boy named Robert Marley, who used to sit in the back of your music class in 1954. But I remember you. I remember everything you taught me." Miss Sarah's hands flew to her mouth in shock. Even from her seat, she could see Bob clearly now on the big screens positioned around the stadium. The little boy she had taught to play guitar had become the most famous musician in Jamaica, possibly in the world. "Miss Sarah," Bob continued, "you were the first person to put a guitar in my hands. You were the first person to tell me that music could be my future. You stayed after school to teach me when you didn't have to. You saw something in me when nobody else did." Bob's voice was breaking now, and many in the crowd were beginning to tear up as they witnessed this unexpected reunion. "Miss Sarah, would you do me the honor of coming down to the stage? I have something I need to say to you, and I want everyone here to witness it." Security personnel immediately moved toward Section C to help Miss Sarah navigate the crowd and the stairs. It took several minutes for her to make her way down to the stage level, her age and frailty requiring careful assistance. But the entire stadium waited patiently, understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary. When Miss Sarah finally reached the stage, Bob knelt down at the edge and took her frail hands in his strong ones. Up close, he could see how much time had changed her. Her face was deeply wrinkled. Her fingers were bent with arthritis, and she moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose body was failing her. But her eyes were still bright with intelligence and kindness. "Miss Sarah," Bob said, his voice gentle and reverent, "do you remember teaching a little boy named Robert to play Amazing Grace on the guitar?" Miss Sarah's eyes filled with tears as the memory came back to her. "Oh my goodness," she said in a voice that, while weakened by age, still carried the authority and warmth that had commanded classrooms for 4 decades. "Little Robert Marley, I never imagined you became Bob Marley." The stadium erupted in applause as the significance of the moment hit the crowd. This elderly woman had taught Bob Marley his first song. Bob helped Miss Sarah onto the stage, supporting her carefully as she walked to the center. Once she was seated in a chair that had been quickly brought out, Bob knelt beside her and spoke into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet the most important teacher in Jamaica. Miss Sarah Thompson taught me my first guitar chords at Stepney Primary School when I was 8 years old. Everything I am as a musician started in her classroom." The applause was thunderous, but Bob raised his hand for quiet. "Miss Sarah, I owe you everything. My career, my success, my ability to touch people's hearts through music. It all began with your patience, your kindness, and your belief in a poor boy who had nothing but dreams." Miss Sarah was crying openly now, overwhelmed by the recognition and the realization of what her former student had become. "Robert," she said, her voice barely audible through the microphone Bob held for her, "I always knew you were special. Even as a little boy, when you played music, there was something spiritual about it. I knew God had plans for you." Bob felt tears streaming down his own face. "Miss Sarah, you probably don't know this, but you changed the course of my life. When my mother wanted to take me out of school to work, it was your letter to her that convinced her to let me stay and study music. When other teachers said I was wasting my time with music, you defended me. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." The stadium was completely silent except for the sound of 25,000 people crying. This wasn't just Bob Marley thanking his teacher. This was every person in the audience remembering a teacher who had believed in them, who had shaped their lives in ways they might not have even recognized. "Miss Sarah," Bob said, "would you sing with me? Would you sing the first song you ever taught me?" Miss Sarah nodded through her tears. Bob picked up his acoustic guitar and began playing the opening chords of Amazing Grace. His voice, strong and clear, began the familiar hymn. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Miss Sarah's voice joined in, weak and trembling, but carrying the same musical ear that had guided Bob's early development. "I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see." The duet between the 34-year-old superstar and the 73-year-old retired teacher was unlike anything anyone in the stadium had ever heard. Bob's voice supported and lifted Miss Sarah's, while her presence reminded him of the innocence and wonder of his earliest musical experiences. As they sang together, the years seemed to melt away. Bob was once again the eager 8-year-old boy learning his first song, while Miss Sarah was the patient teacher who had spent her life nurturing young talents. The bond between teacher and student, forged decades earlier in a rural classroom, was as strong as ever. "'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved." By the third verse, the entire stadium was singing along. 25,000 voices joined Bob and Miss Sarah in a celebration of the power of education, the importance of teachers, and the way that love and encouragement planted in childhood can grow into something that touches the world. When the song ended, Bob set down his guitar and embraced Miss Sarah gently, mindful of her frailty but wanting her to feel the full depth of his gratitude and love. "Thank you," he whispered in her ear. "Thank you for everything." Miss Sarah pulled back and looked at Bob with tears of pride and love in her eyes. "Robert, you've made me so proud. All these years, I've listened to your music on the radio, never imagining that you were my little student. You've used your gifts to spread love and hope around the world. That's what I always prayed you would do." Bob helped Miss Sarah back to her seat and then addressed the audience one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to make something clear. Every success in my career, every award I've won, every life I've touched through music, it all belongs to Miss Sarah Thompson and to teachers like her all over the world. They are the true heroes. They plant seeds in young minds that grow into forests that shade the world." The standing ovation lasted nearly 10 minutes, but Bob wasn't finished honoring his teacher. "Miss Sarah," he said, "you taught me that music is a gift that should be shared. Tonight, I want to share something with you. From this day forward, I'm establishing the Sarah Thompson Music Education Foundation. Every penny from tonight's concert will go to providing musical instruments and education to children who can't afford them. And Miss Sarah, you will never want for anything again as long as I live." Miss Sarah was so overcome with emotion that she could barely speak. "Robert," she managed to say, "you don't need to—" "Yes, I do," Bob interrupted gently. "Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because honoring our teachers is how we honor the gifts they've given us." The concert continued for another hour, but the emotional peak had been reached. Bob performed with an intensity and joy that seemed to flow directly from his reunion with Miss Sarah, who remained on stage for the rest of the show, watching her former student with tears of pride and amazement. After the concert, Bob spent 3 hours with Miss Sarah, catching up on the decades they had been apart. He learned that she had taught for 42 years, retiring at age 65 with a modest pension that barely covered her basic needs. She had never married, dedicating her life to educating children in rural Jamaica. She had followed Bob's career from afar, proud but never imagining that she could contact him or that he would remember her. "Miss Sarah," Bob said as the evening wound down, "I want you to know that not a day goes by that I don't think about something you taught me. Not just about music, but about patience, about believing in people, about using whatever talents we have to make the world better." Miss Sarah smiled, her aged face radiating the same warmth that had comforted countless students over the decades. "Robert, you've exceeded every dream I ever had for you. You've taken the little seed we planted in that classroom and grown it into something that's brought joy to millions of people." True to his word, Bob established the Sarah Thompson Music Education Foundation, which over the following years provided instruments, lessons, and scholarships to thousands of children across Jamaica and beyond. Miss Sarah became the foundation's honorary chairwoman and traveled with Bob to several more concerts, always introduced as the woman who started it all. Miss Sarah lived for 6 more years after that memorable night, passing away peacefully in 1985 at age 79. Bob, despite his own declining health, sang at her funeral, performing Amazing Grace one last time for the teacher who had started his musical journey. In his eulogy, Bob said, "Miss Sarah Thompson understood something that every great teacher knows. We don't teach subjects, we teach students. We don't just share knowledge, we plant dreams. Miss Sarah didn't just teach me to play guitar. She taught me to believe in myself, to see music as a calling rather than just a hobby, to understand that art can change the world." When Bob himself died in 1981, just 2 years after the concert reunion, Miss Sarah was one of the speakers at his memorial service in Jamaica. Despite her age and frailty, she insisted on addressing the thousands of mourners who had come to honor Bob's memory. "Robert was special from the very first day I met him," she told the crowd, her voice weak but determined. "He had a light in his eyes that told me music wasn't just something he did. It was something he was. My job as his teacher wasn't to give him talent. God had already done that. My job was to